Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started with our webinar today. I am Maggie Schilling. Today's webinar is going to cover the Facilities Condition Assessment Guidebook and the Guideway Performance Restriction Guidebook. These are available for comment through the Federal Register. Some of that information is over here on the left. I'm going to jump through these slides. All right, a couple housekeeping items. If you have any questions at any time during the presentation, please feel free to submit those to us through the Q&A pod on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. We will take all comments at the end, but please, if you have a comment throughout or a question, please enter it at any time while I'm talking. We also have a notes pod here and a download pod. On the upper left-hand side of your screen, we have downloads of each of the presentations available. This is for the entire TAM webinar series. I believe, does not look like we have the actual guidebooks available in this pod, but the information on where you can access those is right below in this notes pod. The note pod gives you information where you can see the TAM Final Rule, where you can find information on the NTD asset inventory, and where you can find information on the two guidebooks that we're going to be going over shortly. As I said, these are still open for comment in the Federal Register. If you have any comments after this webinar, I encourage you to make those comments officially through the Federal Register process. That's the best way to ensure that your comments and questions are addressed through the official FTA channels. Okay, presenters today. As I said, I'm Maggie Schilling. I'm the Program Manager for the National Transit Database. I'm in the Office of Budget and Policy here at the FTA. I have with me in the room Ms. Shadoni Smith, who is also from the Office of Budget and Policy, and John Georges, also Budget and Policy. Candace Key is another person that you may hear chime in some of these webinars, but she's not joining us this afternoon. All right, so our agenda today. This presentation will probably take 20 to 30 minutes, and we'll have about 30 minutes or more of questions at the end. We're going to go through the two guidebooks. I'm going to give you an overview. This will familiarize you with the guidebooks, but this is not going to cover enough information for you to actually be able to go forward and do a condition assessment after this session. I wish I were that good in 30 minutes, but I encourage you to read the guidebook. That's going to be where additional information is available and will help lead you through the process. Okay, so we'll jump right in. As I said, the purpose is to familiarize you with these guidebooks, to remind you that we are still accepting comments through the Federal Register response and comment process, and to also give you a quick overview of how to calculate these performance metrics. All right, so NTD data requirements, facility and condition infrastructure, MAP 21 added a new requirement to the NTD section of the transit bill, which basically required the National Transit Database to begin collecting more asset inventory information along with condition assessment information. This obviously overlapped with the Transit Asset Management Program rule. So what we've tried to do is put these together in a sensible way for the industry. So these asset conditions will be collected through the National Transit Database, but they are part of the requirements for your transit asset management plan. So what they do is they help us calculate a state of good repair. Agencies must only conduct and report condition assessments for assets for which they have a direct capital responsibility. This is slightly different than what you're required in terms of the asset inventory. In some cases, like passenger facilities, you're required to report an inventory of your passenger facilities, even if you don't own them. But if you use them in service, you're required to inventory them. We are only requiring a condition assessment for assets for which you have direct capital responsibility. So if you have full or partial capital replacement responsibility, you are required to do a condition assessment and report that to the NTD. If you want additional information on the asset inventory, we will be having another webinar in this series next week to cover that. So I would encourage you to sign up for the NTD asset inventory requirements webinar as well. Okay, so jumping in. Both of the guidebooks here are separated in the way that you see here on your screen. There's a background, scope, and purpose section, a reporting procedures and data requirements, and then the actual procedures for calculating the performance metric, along with appendices that include a glossary, references, and sample forms. So the first one that we're going to go over together is the Facility Condition Assessment Guidebook. All right, so your facilities. We separate these into 4 basic classes: administrative, maintenance, passenger, and parking. This is for the sake of organizing these and when you report them to us and when you set targets against these that are also reported through the NTD. So here you see administrative facilities. These will probably make a lot of sense to you, but basically they're offices for management and support activities. Maintenance facilities, so we have 2, general purpose and heavy maintenance. General purpose is a garage that basically is where you do your light maintenance, so day-to-day repairs, oil changes, etc. Heavy maintenance is really where you do overhauls, large builds, or replacements of major systems. And agencies must report both of these to us. If you have a facility that is a heavy maintenance and a light maintenance facility or a general purpose, you would report that as a general purpose. If you have a facility that is your administrative offices and your garage or a general purpose maintenance facility, you would report that as general purpose. Okay, passenger and parking facilities. So this is basically any substantial passenger facility. So we're not looking for bus stops. We're looking for stations along right-of-way or any significant structure. So if you have a transfer point, a transfer station, where you have a ticket counter, you have a waiting area for passengers, this would be considered a passenger station. But if you just have a roadside stop with a little bench, maybe a cover on top, we're not considering that a passenger station for the sake of reporting or condition assessment. All right, so the steps to conduct a facilities condition assessment. So 5 basic steps. You'll see the flow chart here on the screen. A little hard to see. As I said, if you need this in a little bit bigger screen size, the presentation can be downloaded in the upper left-hand side of this webinar room. So your 5 steps, you're going to define your facility components. You're going to establish your condition assessment language. This is all explained in the Facilities Condition Assessment Guidebook. Then you're going to conduct the assessment, calculate your overall condition, and then document and report it to us. So we'll walk through these steps a little bit. Before you get started, we encourage you to do a little bit of data gathering on the front end. So this would be before you even start your condition assessment, your inspectors should consider pulling together maintenance information schedules, inspection schedules, any data that you have on those facilities, your warranties, and any other background information that might make sense. This is not reportable to us, but we encourage you, just for the sake of easing the process of creating your condition assessment, to get all of this stuff in order before you begin. All right, so part of the language around these condition assessments is the FTA Transit Economic Requirement Scale, or the TERM scores. So it's a 1 to 5 rating scale, with 1 being the worst and 5 being excellent, or brand new facilities, and 1 being poor, or you need immediate repair or replacement, or may have critically damaged components. For the sake of the facilities condition assessments, we are calling anything above a 3 would be considered within a state of good repair, and 2s and 1s are what would be below the state of good repair threshold for your targets. All right, so part of the underpinning to the facilities condition assessment is a set of components that you look at and a set of subcomponents within those components that help you build up to an overall score for your facility. So each facility, as you see here, we broke these into 2 for ease of discussion today. We have your administrative and maintenance facilities, and the components that we recommend you inspect when you're creating your condition assessment, and then the passenger facilities, again, with the list of components that we recommend you inspect to create your condition assessment. The only substantial difference between these 2 is that in the administrative and maintenance facilities, you see that circled here, we have an equipment component section, and in passenger and facilities, instead of equipment, we have your fare collection. All right, as I mentioned, underneath these components are a variety of subcomponents. So for each component that you're inspecting as part of your condition assessment, you'll have a series of subcomponents below that. So here on this slide you see for your substructure component, you'll have subcomponents within that, like your foundation, your walls, your columns, your pilings, etc. For equipment, you'll have subcomponents within the equipment component category, which is equipment related to the function of the facility, including maintenance or vehicle service equipment. So we're recommending in this guidebook that for the sake of looking at systems within your facility and rolling those into your overall condition assessment, that you only include items at $10,000 or above. Again, the information on your subcomponents is not reportable to us. What we are asking for is one score for the entire facility, but what this is leading you through is looking at the pieces underneath that facility, giving those a score that will help you roll up to one overall score. All right, so conducting a component condition assessment. Within the guidebook, you will see for each component that were listed on the slides 2 before this, there is a breakdown of how you would rate that component on a 1 through 5 scale. So here on this slide, we have HVAC. Component ratings should be based on the descriptions within the facility condition guidebook. So for instance, with your HVAC, an excellent would be new construction, no visible defects, no damage, meets your efficiency and capacity goals, and maintains the desired temperature and air quality throughout the facility. On the other hand, a poor would be a system that's well past its useful life and has critical defects affecting its function, and issues are beyond repair and warrant detailed review. So for each of the components that we are asking you to look at, you will see one of these charts within the guidebook. All right, so at the end, you've looked at all of your components, you've looked at the subcomponents below them, you've created a score 1 through 5 for each component, and now you need to roll that up into one overall score for the entire facility. So once you determine the condition ratings for each facility component, you're going to aggregate those scores. We have 3 approaches that we suggest within the facility guidebook. The first is just a weighted average. So you weight it by the cost for each component, and then you use those weighted averages to come up with one overall score. So in this case, that would be a useful approach if you understood the actual replacement cost for each of the components within your facility. Let's say you don't have that detailed information. You don't know what the replacement cost would be for each component, and so a weighted average would be difficult for you. A second approach that we recommend is a median value. So the median value allows you to look at the ratings for each of the components and choose the median value as the overall condition for the facility. So in this case, of course, there's some limitations. Let's say you have 10 subcomponents or 10 components, and 5 of them are a 1 and 5 of them are a 5. In this case, what we would say is if half or more are at a 1, the entire facility would be graded at a 1. So essentially, you would look at the lowest score there, and that is what the facility would be graded if you have this sort of discrepancy amongst the components within your facility. We also allow for some flexibility. A third approach that is undefined, but essentially would be a methodology that an agency would use. What we ask is that it is documented, that it is repeatable. So if you were to give us that methodology and we were to go out and do the same assessment, we would come up with the same number at the end. And this is something that you would keep with your transit asset management plan and would be the methodology that you would use for each facility. Okay. So in the guidebooks, we also provide you with a few sample templates. As I said, we do not collect the detailed information behind your facility condition assessment. We only collect the final output of that condition assessment. These templates are intended to be for your use and to help guide you through the process of creating the condition assessment to us. This form would not be reportable to the NTD or the FTA. All right, there's also some additional references in the guidebooks available. I have a few of them here on this slide. This is, again, in the appendix, just some useful references, and many of these are what we used in creating these guidebooks. All right, so now we'll jump to the second one, the Performance Restriction Calculation Guidebook, or SLO zones. So reporting procedures for this, this is applicable to agencies operating rail-fixed guideway. Only rail-fixed guideway will have a performance restriction calculation that is reportable to the FTA. You'll be submitting both monthly and annual reports. And the primary measure for this, so the one difference is the performance restriction calculation is for your transit asset management plan is percent of Guideway under performance restriction. What we are asking you to report to the NTD and to the FTA is the underlying piece of information that calculates this. So we're asking you to report to us the length of fixed Guideway directional route miles that are under performance restriction. And then the NTD system will calculate that as a percentage of your total fixed Guideway directional route mileage. So this is a little bit different than what the performance target is, or the performance measure is. We're asking you for essentially the numerator for that calculation. All right, so there's a couple data elements that you need to understand to be able to calculate this. Fixed Guideway, directional route miles, fixed Guideway directional route miles, the design speed, and the actual definition of a performance restriction. We're going to walk through those right now. All right, so fixed Guideway. The definition for fixed Guideway, if you were on the earlier version of this, we had a much smaller definition on this slide. I've expanded it out. This is actually the definition that is in law. So the NTD and FTA keeps with the definition that is printed in our transportation law. Here it is on the slide. So fixed Guideway is a public transportation facility using and occupying a separate right-of-way for exclusive use of public transportation, or using rail, using a fixed catenary system for passenger ferry system, or for bus rapid transit systems. As I said earlier, what we are asking for in a performance restriction is only for rail modes. So this guidebook does not apply to bus Guideway or ferry Guideway. I can't imagine how you would have a slow zone on the water. Perhaps that's possible. Okay, directional route miles. So directional route miles this is the same definition that's been used in NTD reporting unto eternity. So if you're familiar with NTD reporting and the definition of directional route miles, this will not be new to you. It's the total mileage in each direction that public transportation vehicles travel during revenue service. And it is specified for each combination of mode and service with fixed Guideway. So directional route miles do not take into consideration the amount of lanes or the amount of tracks. It is really just the direction of travel. So if you have one single piece of track that is 1 mile long and you travel both north and south on that single piece of track, that is 2 directional route miles. If you have 2 tracks, one is north, one is south, again, 2 directional route miles. If you have one single piece of track and you only travel in one direction along that piece of track, that is 1 directional route mile. The fixed Guideway directional route miles, exactly the same concept, except only fixed Guideway. So it's just the directional route miles on fixed Guideway. Again, this does not take into consideration the amount of tracks that are on that piece of Guideway. Okay, the next definition, and this is one of the new ones for the guidebook, is the design speed definition. So the design speed is what helps you understand whether or not you have a performance restriction. So what we are calling design speed here is the maximum allowable speed at the time the fixed Guideway segment opened. So determining this design speed can be tricky. Maybe you don't have records of what the original design speed was. So we would recommend in that case that you use the maximum historically scheduled speed. Basically, what we're looking at here is, was this track designed for 50 miles an hour? If it was designed for 50 miles an hour, any speed restriction that you put on that is below 50 miles an hour, so at any point you say, for reasons of safety or for reasons of track condition, we are not allowing trains to move over this section of track any faster than 35 miles an hour, that would be considered a speed restriction. The design speed is not taking into consideration what your normal scheduled speed is. So if you schedule for a lower speed than the design speed as a matter of operations, your design speed is still the higher speed. So you may travel 35 miles an hour as a matter of your operations, but you could still run a train over that track 50 miles an hour at the original design speed. That the design speed would still be considered the higher of those two. Okay, so the performance restrictions definition, I sort of talked about this a little bit in the last slide, but it's when the maximum speed of the vehicles on your fixed guideway segment is below the segment's design speed. So here's the little funny part of the Guideway performance restriction calculation. We are asking for a snapshot each month. So in order to try and get the best snapshot possible, we have requested a snapshot at 9 a.m. local time on the first Wednesday of each month. So as I said, you'll be reporting this monthly to us. So you'll be reporting your fixed guideway under performance restriction once a month, and it will be from 9 a.m. on the first Wednesday of each month. Our thought behind this is that 9 a.m. will generally be at peak service for most agencies. Wednesdays are unlikely to be holidays, and so we're looking for, during the peak of the peak service on a standard operating day, what are your performance restrictions? Part of the philosophy behind this is the performance restrictions that we are asking for are all performance restrictions. We're not asking you to break out what types of performance restriction they are. So if you have a slow zone in place for a work crew, that is reportable. If it's in place at 9 a.m. on the first Wednesday of each month, it gets reported to us as a slow zone. This is really for ease of reporting. And again, going back to why we chose this specific time slot, most operations would try and avoid putting an unnecessary work crew out at peak of the peak service in the middle of a morning commute on a standard work day. So we were hoping that choosing this time would eliminate some of the rolling slow zones that are going on day to day for maintenance activities that do not point to condition of track. We're hoping that choosing this time will give us the best shot at, the clearest and simplest reporting requirement, while also helping weed out some of just the day-to-day maintenance, but keeping in long-standing performance restrictions that point to the condition of the track. If you have comments specific to this, we would love to hear them. Please do comment on the Federal Register related to this. Okay, so how to calculate a performance restriction. Again, this flow chart will look similar from the facilities. We have 6 steps laid out in the guidebook. You're going to list your fixed guideway segments and the total lengths by length for each month. You're going to identify the potential performance restrictions, then itemize actual performance restrictions, calculate the performance restriction length by month, calculate the annual average performance restriction, and then document and report to us. So monthly reporting, you'll just give us that one number each month. At the end of the year is when you'll aggregate all of those numbers and then calculate your average for your final report with your annual NTD report. I'll walk you through this process a little bit now. All right, so you're going to start by listing your fixed guideway segments. You'll see here what you're going to do is for your transit asset management plan and for your NTD reporting, you will be reporting your directional route miles under performance restriction for each mode. You'll also be giving us a target for each rail mode that you run. So if you run commuter service and you run a heavy rail operation and you run a light rail operation, you'll be giving us performance restriction information and a target for each one of those modes. So in that case, 3 targets. In this example, though, we're going to walk through, we have, it looks like we did not specify the type of service here, but you'll see that what they've done here is they've listed all of their segments for their service. You'll see that they have, the beginning and the end, so from 0 to 0.1 is track 1 in your west station, so it's 0.1 directional route miles, and the design speed there is 10 miles an hour. Get my little, there we go, my little arrows in. You'll see right under that is they have track 1 west to Park, so this first is intended to be in their station. They have a design speed of 10 miles an hour. Once they leave the station, they have a design speed of 40 miles an hour. This will be helpful as we move along in this example. Okay, so the next step, you're going to identify your potential restrictions. So we suggest that you collect all of this additional data beyond what is minimum. Again, the way that you are seeing this data collected here, this is not what you will be reporting to the NTD. You will report the number that comes out at the end of this. Collecting all this data is what we recommend you use as you calculate this metric. So this would all be data for your internal use that would then lead to the final piece that would be reportable to us. So you'll remember from the last slide that there was a maximum speed of 10 miles an hour in the station, and that was from mile marker 0 to point 1, and a maximum of 40 miles an hour between point 1 and 2.9. Okay, here we see at the top there's a performance restriction in place from the 0 marker to the 0.35 marker on their track, and the performance restriction is 10 miles an hour. So how do we determine what is under performance restriction with the track segments that we have available? All right, so we're going to go in and we're going to itemize those restrictions. Here you see for track 1 west in the station, 0 to point 1, you had 0.1 directional route miles with a design speed of 10. If you remember from the last slide, the performance restriction in place from 0 to 0.35 was 10 miles an hour. Because the design speed here in the station is only 10 miles an hour, that station is not considered under performance restriction. However, the track immediately outside, 0.1 to 0.35, is designed for 40 miles an hour. So it now has a performance restriction in place. So here you have 0.1 to 0.35, so 0.25 directional route miles are under performance restriction. There we go. First one, no performance. Last one, performance. All right, so you'll go through and do that for each section of track. At the end, you'll have your directional route miles under performance restriction. You see here, we're recommending that you actually put in some notes about what caused your performance restriction. This will be helpful to you. Again, not reportable to us, but intended to be helpful for you as you calculate this. At the end, you'll have directional route miles under performance restriction. You just total them up. Nothing to it. Okay, end of the year. Here we go. This is the spreadsheet that you have put together throughout your year. On the left-hand side, you have all of the causes of your performance restrictions. On the right-hand side, you have some months. You have how many directional route miles were under performance restriction due to each of those causes on the left-hand side, and you have your total here at the bottom. Let's see. Okay, so for March, these are, your total was 4.2 miles under performance restriction. We have one of these for each. At the end of the year, what you're going to do is you're going to take all 12 of your months, and you're just going to do a straight average. So here we have all 12 months, straight average, total for the year, 3.11 directional route miles under performance restriction. As I said, the end of each month, this bottom row here circled in blue, you're going to be reporting those numbers to us once a month with your monthly NTD reporting. At the very end of the year, you're going to report to us this purple bubble on the right, so what your final number is. The NTD system will calculate the percentage of your track that this represents. That will be matched against the target that you've reported for in the previous year. So you will say, in the previous year, I've reported my target, what percentage of my track I expect to have under performance restriction for the next fiscal year. At the end of that fiscal year, when you report it to us, the NTD system will calculate, based on the directional route miles that you've reported, what the percentage actually was. You will see the comparison. All right. So, guidance on special cases, establishing design speed. The guidebook also provides some additional information on how you deal with special cases. So, how you establish a design speed if you're not sure what your design speed should be, identifying when performance restrictions occur, and measuring the length of performance restrictions. So this is just additional information that you can reference in the guidebook. All right, again, the guidebook also has some appendices to help lead you through, glossary of terms. There's a sample performance restriction calculation form. I know I'm beating a dead horse on this one, but basically that sample form is for your use. You are not required to report all of the data that is collected on that sample form to us, only the final number that comes out at the end. Okay, as I said, please do comment on these. If you have comments, questions, concerns, the Federal Register process, the notice and comment process where you submit an official comment to us is the best way to ensure that all of the inner workings of the FTA are kicked off to address that comment. That's the best way to have us officially respond to it and have it considered for the final guidebooks that are published. So if you have a comment, please do submit it. Comments are open through September 26th of this year. Here's all the information you need to find that notice on the